It's an honor for me to be here today amongst so many distinguished guests and talk a little bit about observations that we at IBM and I have about what's happening in the world. I really do believe there's a new stage of global integration. It has some similarities to what people have called flattening of the world. That's been underway for the past 3 decades, but it's also different in many respects. And by that I mean it holds implications for actions from the emerging world as well as the developing world in particular. And I want to focus on some of those implications from public policy, from the perspective of public policy in the developed world versus the perspective of a corporation that's operating in 170 countries. As it's often been noted, and as you know, the economy has been shaped since the 1980s by three major events: the embrace of open trade, the digital network revolution, and a striking increase in political stability. Together, these forces have leveled the playing field for markets, industries, and nations, opening up a door through which vast swaths of the planet have now entered the global economy. For emerging markets, walking through the door was relatively straightforward. If you ended your civil war, or you dropped your protectionist tariffs, you embraced digital IT, you grew. If you did some combination of those things, you grew even faster. This created enormous, and I would say irresistible, incentive for investment, manufacturing, and jobs, and that moved all over the world. It also reordered industries and rebalanced economies. It also lifted, and I think it's remarkable, that it lifted 500 million people into the middle class around the world. And I think we'd all agree is a very good thing for society. A decade ago, the world was proclaimed flat by a famous author in the United States. That might have been premature at the time, but I think today it's no longer controversial. We all recognize that our planet now runs on supply chains, not just products, but for services that are global. It is increasingly difficult to characterize what is an import and what is an export, since much of what is imagined, produced, delivered is done in many places around the world. And there's no more, quote, offshoring when there is no longer a shore. So does this mean a stable regime of global integration has been put in place? Hardly not the case. And I think the path to growth and progress isn't clear. Hardly, in fact, is the key point here, because I say that this is where things get really, really interesting. The fact is that the developing world has reached the end of the easy path. The rising GDP per capita income. This is sometimes called the middle income trap. The idea that it's a lot easier to go from a low income to a middle income economy than to jump from a middle income economy to a high income economy. As if it weren't challenging enough, this shift is happening at the same time all over the world. CNN's Fareed Zakaria explained during an IBM forum last year, every market is now in a competitive race with all the others, which have also been sprinting for the last 15 years, all to arrive at the same spot. The situation is new, and it's increasing an intense competitive dynamic on a scale that many people don't yet grasp. Simply put, these markets have plucked the low-hanging fruit of global integration, and let's call that Act One. Now they face a radical, more competitive arena requiring higher degrees of regulation and standards, where there are higher expectations for everything, from product, service quality, working conditions, protection of intellectual property, and yes, rule of law. Notice I said higher, not lower. In other words, to succeed in the new global economy, you need to take your game to a new level. The playing field may be flat, but it's not at sea level. The game is moving to a higher plateau. Conversely, this moment presents new, exciting opportunities for the developed world. It may seem perverse to use the word exciting being here today in Brussels, or we're talking about Europe or North America or Japan these days, but many of the capabilities and the skills of innovation and innovation-based economy are deeply ingrained in the world's developed world, not developing world. However, there's a catch. These economies, in particular the government leaders, must tackle some pretty big challenges if they're going to compete successfully in the years ahead. I think that's pretty self-evident at this point in time. Before I describe the changes these leaders must undertake, I think it's important to be clear about what this flattened playing field really is. It's not just about connectivity. It goes far beyond things like Facebook, Twitter, hashtags, smartphones, and the like. Those developments are wonderful and they're convenient and they add to lots of communications and personal convenience, but they're part of something that's much larger. A world that has become pervasively instrumented, interconnected, and intelligent, in which computation is being infused into things no one thinks as of a computer. At IBM, we call that a smarter planet. And let me give you some idea of its scope. We are all aware of approximately 2 billion people on the internet. The number is growing rapidly in every part of the world thanks to the explosion of mobile technology. But there's also upwards to 1 trillion interconnected and intelligent objects and organisms, which many refer to as the Internet of Things. There are 1 billion transistors for every human being on the planet. Intelligence is now embedded in the systems that enable services to be delivered, physical goods to be made and sold, everything from people and freight to oil to water and electrons to move, and billions of people and how they work and live every day. All this is generating vast stores of information. It is estimated that there will be 44 times as much data generated over the next decade, reaching 35 zettabytes by 2020. A zettabyte is 1 followed by 21 zeros for the people that aren't mathematicians in the room, like myself. But that's a lot of data that's there and available. You can apply advanced computation and analysis to that. You can see what's happening in real time. You can make adjustments. This enables a very different kind of insight, foresight, and decision making of which society and business has not dealt with here to now. So that's the field we're all playing on. And the developed economies ought to be in a strong position to do well at this game. However, they first have to step up to some major challenges. And that's because over the past 3 decades, something else was going on, in addition to global integration. The world's mature economies were piling up massive deficits, not just financial, but I'd say deficits of competitiveness. Their populations are aging, their infrastructure is rusting, their education systems were becoming increasingly out of date, their laws and governments were not keeping pace with the change. Now the bill has come due. And for all those deficits, it's all come due at once. Just as all emerging markets are being hit at once by the middle-class trap, so the developed world finds itself having to address its huge structural overhangs, and with urgency, thanks to the financial crisis. And maybe at the end, when history's written, this will have been the great wake-up call that got everybody focused on what needed to be focused for the past several decades. It may be appealing to think that we can postpone that day of reckoning, but that isn't a serious option. The new great game of global competition is not going to wait to start league play while we get our house in order, ladies and gentlemen. As daunting as this seems, it can seem nearly impossible if you look at it through the lens of the media. I believe there's a major opportunity for a breakthrough, and not to be distorted by the short-time cycles of the news cycles we all live in today. I believe we can put our societies on a sustainable, long-term foundation and to improve our ability to compete. And I'd like to offer 3 broad ways in which governments and economies of the developed world, I believe, can and must change the way they operate. First, a society must invest in the future to improve its competitive muscle. And I'll repeat that. A society must invest in the future to improve its competitive muscles. Debates rage on today about austerity, and without question, there is a need for serious and grown-up ways to deal with our financial deficits, both in the public and the private sectors. But we can't cost our way to competitiveness. You can't cost cuts your way to the future. In fact, winning on a flatter, higher playing field will require increased investments in key areas, such as infrastructure, education, deep research. For instance, the American Society of Civil Engineers estimates that the required investments in the physical infrastructure of the next 5 years in the United States is $2.2 trillion. As Mario Monti, my old friend, has said in Italy, we need a vision that includes both austerity and investment, that recognizes that Italy must address its debt problems through the former, but it cannot compete and win without also making Italy a place that creates value, attracts investment, has a growth agenda. In business, we call that a value proposition. We had an interesting approach that was developed in the United States, by the way, as an aside. There's a bipartisan plan put in place by the president called Simpson-Bowles Commission. I hope it gets revisited and revived. It was thoughtful, it was mature, it was long-term, it was balanced between fiscal responsibility and investment for the future. Not tied to an election cycle, unfortunately, but hopefully, after the cycle, it does get revived. This is not just about technology. We must adopt our policies to nurture and promote an innovation-based economy. Our countries and our cities must be able to tap into global supply chains, talented pools of people and collaborative relationships, and to use them to create things of indigenous value, whether they're products or services. And that will require greater flexibility in how our economies operate through smarter labor and trade regulations. Second, every economy must have a compelling value proposition that is differentiating. It's not me too, it's not commoditizing. How do you compete in the world where there is no outsourcing? Because there's no longer an out. That's what it is today. It's not outsourcing. It's just what it is. The answer is simple. You need to be better at something. That's how free trade and comparative advantage work. So cities and countries now have to address a basic question, one that businesses answer every day, and that is, what is our unique value proposition? I was on a panel in Washington, D.C. a couple of years ago, and I was asked by the moderator, your companies, and IBM, has lots of cash. Why don't you invest it in the United States? So I said to the moderator, a college colleague of mine, I said, you've asked the wrong question. You should ask yourself, why would we invest in the United States? He was silenced. The room was silenced. So I felt compelled, someone had to answer. Since no one there from the government could answer, why would you invest in the United States? So I said, well, how about this as a reason to invest? Highly skilled workforce, rule of law, protection of intellectual property, fair capital markets, great universities, safe and livable cities. What is that list? It's not some moral imperative. It's called a value proposition. That's the asset of Europe. It's the asset of the United States. So going forward, those basic qualities by themselves, I think, just aren't enough, because you have to ask yourself those questions, and how will you differentiate yourself in a world of choice, in a free flow of information, ideas, and capital throughout the globe. The cities and countries and economies that succeed are going to have clarity on the kind of economy and societal innovation they will do uniquely and better than anyone else. The qualities of their culture and their knowledge base that makes them stand out in the global competitive marketplace for talent and investment. At IBM, we asked ourselves 10 years ago 4 simple questions when I first came into the job. Very simple, probably have never been, and I can assure you will never be taught by the finest business schools of the world. Why would customers buy from us rather than someone else? Why would somebody invest in us when they have lots of choices of where to put their money? Why would someone work here when there are options and alternatives all over the world in the tech industry? And why would society give us permission to operate within their geographic borders? 4 simple questions. Again, nothing that's taught by our very admired, learned organizations in the United States. Those questions grew out of a core set of values that we shared a sense for why IBM exists, our sense of purpose, what we do as an entity, our value system, as Ann described. Those answers in turn shaped our strategies, our actions, and our daily behaviors at IBM, and how our company, or how your company, your city, your country, how would you answer those questions? You know, and as I say to my colleagues in IBM, answering the question was simple. Making it real, that's hard, because you make trade-offs, you reprioritize, you make decisions, you move to the future, you don't live in the past. Third, government itself must become smarter. People argue it should be bigger, it should be smaller, and it should be something in between. It's the wrong debate, ladies and gentlemen. It's the wrong debate. Government, like business, needs to become smarter. By that, I don't just mean digitizing government services or having a paperless Estonia, or putting up a website, you know, right? I mean, government has a key role in driving this agenda. So government needs deep subject matter expertise infused in how government actually does everything. It can't happen without talent. Think about it. All the services and functions that government is entrusted to provide to the public, they're all changing. Consider public safety. We used to measure our crime-fighting capacity by the size of our police force and the state of art of their equipment. But more and more police departments are fighting crime with data. New York City is now one of the safest, largest cities in the world. Why? Because it embraced data. It learned how to analyze it and reconceive its mission and skills around it. The approach to public safety is not taught yet in schools. Data analysis is not there yet. It will be. Traffic management used to mean building wider roads, adding more trains and buses. Today, Helsinki and Stockholm are reducing congestion, lowering carbon emissions, and increasing the use of public transportation by using real-time data to manage pricing and schedules. Again, this is not taught in our schools. I argue that it will be. How do you respond to emergencies? We have ample evidence of after-the-fact scrambling from a terrorist attack or natural disasters. But elsewhere, such as Madrid and Tayside, Scotland, leaders are creating emergency response command centers that enable them not just to coordinate public services in real time, but even to anticipate problems and head them off before they balloon. They are tapping into the power of predictive analytics. They don't teach this in city planning programs either. Again, I argue they will in time. Even take something as simple as handling the influx of tourists. Venice is using sensors and mobile phones to help visitors discover lesser-known parts of the city, to provide instant information on historical sites, and to prevent walking jams. This applies to water, to food safety, to energy, to healthcare, to all systems that make up a system of systems of a modern city and a modern economy. Every field of science, business, and society is changing and being transformed before our eyes. Government has to be at the forefront of these changes and has a very, very important role. It has to figure out the ways government can attract the world's deepest experts of these new kinds of economic and societal systems into government. I'll tell you that in the United States, the best students simply don't want to work in government. They'd rather invent Facebook or Groupon or Google. It's a serious problem. At a time, at least they no longer go to Wall Street, so I guess we've made some progress. Not much, but some. But it really is a serious problem because you need experts. You need experts to know how the world works, to fix these societal systems that are smart and sustainable. And as I said in the beginning, it's not about big or large or small or mid-size. It's about smart. That's going to transform what we need done as we move to the future. Perhaps we can't do much in the short term to counter this increasing polarization of our electoral and legislative processes, but there are other ways, I think, to tackle this expertise deficit in government. So what about adopting a new model that we're familiar with of public and private partnerships? I'm talking about collaboration amongst business, academia, and government to nurture and to share and attract the kind of expertise that's necessary into the public arena. And screaming moral imperative on television isn't the answer. It does not work, and it will not work. So what is it? What is the how? Well, I believe we have to move on two fronts. The first is to come together across boundaries of old estates, to tackle these three imperatives at a whole societal level. The Europe 2020 vision, to me, is a very, very strong start. I read through it. I had the pleasure of meeting with the commissioner yesterday, Kagan Quinn. I almost said Cahagan, which is the U.S. pronunciation, but I caught myself, John. And we had a great conversation. And I wish we had such a point of view of Horizon 2020 in the United States. I'm somewhat jealous that we haven't been able to put together a similar perspective. I'm envious in a way of what the commissioner has done. The second front that we need to do is develop and empower new kinds of leadership and leaders. And the truth is, they are plentiful in supply. All you have to do is look around. Just look around the world. Just look at what IBM is doing with our clients in cities and countries and businesses around the world. It's everywhere. I know it might be surprising to you. I mean, so many pundits describe this as a global crisis of leadership. However, when you get on the ground and you look at what's going on in cities and countries and industries around the world, when you talk to entrepreneurs, mayors, commissioners, and community leaders, you don't encounter complaints and frustration and anxiety and blaming. Instead, you run into energy, imagination, and a kind of pragmatic optimism. It's fun. As the cyber fiction pioneer William Gibson observed, the future's already here. It's just not evenly distributed. These new leaders exhibit three fundamental characteristics which I believe begin to define the new model of global leadership. First, they embrace technological capabilities. They're hungry for data and for technology that can unlock insights. Europe happens to be in a strong position, large part and thanks to Commissioner Cruz and the framework around Europe's digital agenda, including Connecting Europe's facilities that she launched last autumn. Today, Europe has 5 of the top 6 nations in the worldwide digital economy rankings, as measured by the Economist Intelligence Unit, and 28 of the top 50 spots. Second, they think in terms of systems. Take Rio de Janeiro. In order to deal with the catastrophic mudslides that strike during the rainy season, Mayor Paz and his colleagues, getting ready for the World Cup and the Olympics, began to focus on a system. They could have picked any one element of that challenge, applying, for example, high-resolution weather technology that IBM has called Blue Thunder to pinpoint tropical storms and when they would strike. They could have built a smarter solution for emergency response police. They could have linked healthcare systems and providers to local communities. And all that would have been ambitious and required a lot of persuasion and constituency building. But Rio went much farther. They looked at the city as a whole system. They built an integrated operations center. It coordinates information from more than 30 cities, regional and national departments, and real-time visualization, monitoring, orchestration of responsive incidents across the entire city. The integrated operations center is a different way to see and manage the entire city and its rich complexity. As such, it's going to serve as the foundation for Rio's competitive positioning going on to the future. I think it's a great example. I asked the mayor when we were at his house, that he hosted us at a dinner last fall, and a lot of the international media. I said, how did you do this? Where did you get the money? Right? Where did you get the money? He said, well, there's no money. Where did you get the money? He said, I made some trade-offs. There's always money in a budget. I found it and we got started. And he thanked us because we sent an IBM scientist by the name of Guru, and he calls him his guru, his Brazilian Indian, and they built the system. So leaders are not just responding to emergencies, they're building systems and things that are going to serve for the long term. Third, these leaders are pragmatic, not ideological. You find this especially at the city level. If you're a mayor or a police chief or a head of an urban school system, you don't have the luxury of ideology. You got to keep people safe, you got to educate kids, you got to reduce crime. You're not blessed with an ideological point of view. And so the decisions they make every day are visible and touch people's lives. If these city leaders share any ideology at all, it is this. They believe in a smarter way to get things done. So I urge you to learn from them, to invest in them. Learn from your cities, invest in your cities. Of course, it's right to celebrate the miracle of Silicon Valley and Bangalore, as I'd say, crucibles of innovation. There's a lot being written lately about the manufacturing hubs that are rising in China. But none of those is an intellectual or cultural as rich of a petri dish as you find here in the cities of Europe. Invest in these incubators and accelerators for a smarter future. Importantly, seek out and learn from your forward-thinking leaders down at the local level who are pioneering not just what to build, but how to build it, how to build constituency support for it, how to get a bond referendum done for it, how to govern once you build it. The issues we face today, of course, are challenging. I believe they're solvable. I believe they can be solved. I don't think there's any reason to despair. It's a temporary point in time. The new capabilities at our disposal allow us to do this. For the first time in history, to tackle entire economies and societies, we can do that at a systemic level. The conditions that now exist for a single, prosperous, progressive global economy, that includes all the geographies, sectors, and people of our planet, they exist today. The key will be leadership. Of course, it always is. But shame on us if we don't move aggressively to seize that opportunity. Shame on us if we allow yesterday's battles to cloud our vision of tomorrow's promise. Yeah, I'm optimistic, and as many Europeans say, Americans are always delusioned with optimism. We're no longer the colonies of the UK. But fundamentally, but we all, most of us are European immigrants, I might add. I'm second generation. So I guess we're very familiar when we come back. But seriously, I think you expect, not because I expect human nature to change, because I think there's an enormous new natural resource at our disposal. People will always be people, but we have something today we've never had before. And by that I mean there's a gusher of data that enables us to literally see and understand our world as never before. What the discovery of the Western Hemisphere was to the 15th century, what the discovery of steam power was to the 18th century, what the discovery of electricity was to the 19th century. The explosion of data will be in the 21st century. Its economic and societal value are incalculable. If we seize upon this new resource, I believe future historians will look back on this moment not as the so-called new normal of lowered expectation, not as a bifurcation of the world into the new and the old, not as the era of the growing gaps between the have and the have-nots. They'll see this as a dawn of a new golden age of innovation, that widely shared economic growth and a chance for truly global citizenship. I think you guys in the European Union are off to a great start. I think you have a point of view. You understand what's required to create an innovation-based society. You have a strategy. In 2002 at IBM, we had a strategy. 10 years later, we have a thriving business. I'd encourage you to do the same. Thank you for your time.